Hello and welcome to today's show. I'm Davina, the host of whatever this is. I'm making politics interesting, looking at the best of Twitter, pushing back against purposeful false narratives meant to erode democracy, social cohesion, etc., to make some people more wealthy at the expense of others. So we're here today to be pro-democracy, to engage with verified information, facts, and some useful speculation where possible. And the first thing I'm going to do today is look at the very beautiful Miss Ukraine. What's her name? Victoria Apansenko. Good for her. She has an extraordinary costume, and I think it's illustrative of the value of symbology in helping people cohere together and be supportive behind a cause. So in this case, the cause that her outfit is trying to invoke support for is the cause of defending the Ukrainian people against an unprovoked militaristic invasion, ongoing act of aggression by the Russian government. So, but I should add, with the support of a significant number of Russian people, and hopefully that number is falling as each day passes.
This Warrior of Light costume symbolizes Ukraine's fight for freedom. The Warrior of Light protects her country like Archangel Michael, who is a guardian of soldiers and considered to be the patron of Kiev, the capital city. This Warrior of Light will help in their fight, Ukraine.
So the mechanized wing opening component of that was pretty impressive. Definitely color me is impressed. And yes, as the argument goes that I put in the title, there is a need to push back against Russian false narratives that Ukraine somehow was asking for it, or that it's fair for Ukrainians to suffer because NATO is hurting Russia's feelings by virtue of existing. No, Putin. We will continue to loudly assert that countries are allowed to defend themselves against imperialistic aggression, that it's okay to want to save the citizens of your country from the destruction of infrastructure, from being cold and hungry and without electricity, and having citizens frequently bombed and attacked in a more one-on-one way. And I'm thinking specifically of the reports. You know what, it's a little bit not child friendly, and so because this is still a relatively early time, I won't go into it, but we know what we know, what investigators have uncovered in Ukraine and scenes where Russian soldiers have recently fled. So yes, always a pushback, because silence in a time of crisis such as this has a degree of complicity attached to it, because silence creates a vacuum that is filled by the most passionate. And in the times of escalating fascism, kleptocracy, i.e. government that involves theft, and this is theft of Ukrainian peace, Ukrainian stability. Certainly they've invigorated the nationalistic sentiment of the Ukrainian people in wanting to maintain territorial sovereignty and to protect their own people against an invading neighbor, being Russia. But yes, we don't allow our silence to show a ceding of rhetorical and philosophical space to Russian arguments, which are lies. And I'm guessing that anybody tuned into this channel is probably already on board with that argument. Now I'm going to progress to another form of theft, which is stealing from third graders, stealing from school students by depriving them of access to books that contain a moral introduction to the issues of racism and discrimination, because NPR were visiting a school in Ohio. They were doing a podcast on the teaching of economic concepts. The teacher was reading a Dr. Seuss book, and the third graders began to make observations about what was being depicted in the book. It was, Sneetches discriminating against Sneetches without stars on their stomach or with stars, vice versa. We can listen to an extract from that. So luckily the NPR team have released some footage. So 2 minutes.
That's kind of mean because
2 minutes and 15 seconds audio clip.
That's kind of mean because just because their bellies are plain and they don't have stars on it doesn't mean that they're not special.
Right. Doesn't mean they're not special. Noah?
It's almost like what happened back then, how people were treated.
Oh, where'd it go? Hey, I'm listening to that.
Stars on it doesn't mean that they're not special.
Right. Doesn't mean they're not special. Noah?
It's almost like what happened back then, how people were treated, disrespected.
Was made in that time.
Like white people disrespected black people, but then they might stand up in the book.
Oh, so let's keep reading to find out if they do stand up, maybe a little bit. So when you say stand up, get included?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot in this book. That's the beauty of kids' books. They're so simple and complex at the same time. And this is going so well. They're making connections, and I haven't even asked a question. Mandy Robeck keeps reading the Sneetches. A non-Sneetch, Sylvester McMonkey McBean, he rolls into town. And he sees how much worse it is to be a Sneetch without a star than to be a Sneetch with a star.
Then quickly, Sylvester McMonkey McBean put together a very peculiar machine. And he said, "You want stars like a star-belly Sneetch? My friends, you can have them for $3 each."
He sees an opportunity to profit.
Then, of course, old Sylvester McMonkey McBean invited them into his star-off machine. Then, of course, from then on, as you probably guessed, things really got into a horrible mess.
At this point, Amanda Beeman, the communications person with the school district, stands up. She looks really upset. She waves her hands to get Mrs. Robeck's attention to stop reading.
Scanning them for this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I feel comfortable with this book being one of the ones featured. I just feel like this isn't teaching anything about economics, and this is a little bit more about differences with race and everything like that. So do you mind, Mrs. Robeck, if we pause this book?
I mean, we have a list here of all the things. This is about preferences, open markets, economic
I just
laws.
don't think this might be appropriate for the third grade class and for them to have a discussion around it. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that if that's
Okay. I just don't think that this is going to be the discussion that we want it to around economics. So I'm sorry, we're going to cut this one off.
Now, this is really one of those incidents that is a microcosm illustrative of the macrocosm. So this very scenario right now is playing out in some form or other in American schools, particularly in states that are dominated by Republican leadership, because it has become a selling point to use fears over children discussing racism, children being introduced to the idea that racism has existed and potentially still does exist, has a legacy, has even a past, that officials are swooping in to say, oh, I'm concerned about that. Let's remove the book from the library, or let's not discuss that book in the classroom. Let's not discuss that book in front of the NPR podcast people. One way or another, one variation or another, school children are being deprived of these conversations. And Dr. Seuss is a quintessentially American author, very successful. Definitely some of his books have been removed from publication. Some of his completely lesser known books, I don't even know their names, but I saw examples of the illustrations of Black people, which were cartoonish and reminiscent of minstrel performances. So yes, the lesser known books have fallen out of favor. So obviously Dr. Seuss' real name, was it Theodore Streusel? Theodore something, had exposure to and his own thinking was contaminated by anti-Black racism. Nevertheless, that didn't contaminate all the rest of his thinking, and he understood that discrimination existed. I imagine the stars are a none too subtle reference, at least for grown-ups, to the situation in which Nazi Germany, the Fourth Reich, was imposing the Star of David on Jewish residents and Jewish citizens of Russia and not Russia, Germany, and then other European nations that they invaded, to highlight to children the perils of categorizing people according to their membership of a demographic group, whether that be stars on the bellies or no stars on the bellies, or Jewish faith or another faith. It was to push that idea of church and state should be separated, and the state should have no business interfering with people's lives on the basis of their own personal religious beliefs and their membership in a religious group. Third graders are very capable of making moral distinctions and engaging with moral issues and making those historical connections. Yes. So Bob noted that it's easier for conservatives to give no information to young persons instead of misinformation. I heard on a podcast yesterday, Bob, someone articulating a sentiment that said the goal of disinformation is often not even to sell disinformation, but to introduce confusion. Because when you undermine people's commitment to truth, then you have sufficiently shifting sands that are difficult to establish a foundation on. You've undermined what you wanted to undermine. You don't have to make people fully convinced of an alternate set of facts. You just have to undermine their capacity to agree on a set of facts in the first place. And then you've destabilized society. And there are multiple people who benefit from chaos, who use chaos as a ladder to advance their own agenda of self-enrichment and self-promotion. So thank you for listening to me on Twitch. I know it helps you post a comment, just so that anybody watching on Twitter knows I can't see any comments from Twitter. Using the platform that I'm using to multi-stream to YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. All right, let's see what else I have. I think a couple of other things I wanted to share today. George Santos saying, I've lived an honest life, because as fascists will often illustrate, audacity in and of itself is a power technique to demonstrate your complete freedom from shame or guilt or connection to the truth. So someone who is now famous internationally and nationally for being a profligate liar can go on Steve Bannon's broadcast called War Room and talk to another profligate liar, Representative Matt Gaetz, and say, I've lived an honest life. I'm just going to play that because it's 21 seconds. And I'm of the camp that say you don't turn away from what your enemies are saying. You don't turn away from what your political opponents are saying. You hear it so that you can formulate a response, even as you understand that, yes, having a quick, witty reply or rejoinder is not going to solve a problem, but that awareness is a foundation of enough motivation to respond, enough motivation to counteract, enough motivation to not be passive or silent in the face of escalating injustice and escalating fascist techniques. Oh, it went away, but I will make it come back.
I've worked my entire life. I've lived an honest life. I've never been accused, sued of any bad doing. So
Bad doing. That's a gentleman whose mental gears are turning in his head to try and find a way to represent himself and his history of shameless lying and fraud.
You know, it's the equity of my hard-working self, and I've invested inside of me. Like I said, it didn't come from Burisma.
It's the equity of my hard-working self that I've invested in me. Well, that's quite a sentence, and the only reason someone who should be ashamed of himself, who is currently under investigation at a federal and state level for fraudulent financial disclosures on federal forms and campaign finance, breaking campaign finance law, and potentially under investigation as well currently in Brazil for check fraud, for having stolen checkbooks from clients of his mother, who at the time was a home nurse when she was alive. Also, Fatima was her first name. She was not the daughter of Holocaust survivors. She was a devoted Catholic, born to Catholic parents who lived in Brazil during the war, who were never Ukrainian Jews fleeing the Holocaust, as George Santos falsely told the good voters of New York District. What is it, District 3? Anyway, it's very offensive to me as an actual granddaughter of Polish Ukrainian Jews who fled the Holocaust. Well, they survived the Holocaust and fled Poland, just left Poland some years later. I guess the post-war environment wasn't full of remorse or anything. Anyway, they came to Australia to establish themselves instead, but had to learn English and had to go through all of those adjustment challenges, which are part of the migrant experience. But yeah, so just that it's an extra layer of personal offense for me in relation to George Santos's lies. But I understand that to many Americans, it's very offensive that someone who has been so exposed to be a thorough, incorrigible liar has just been sworn in to office in the Republican Party, and that so many Republicans are silent and withholding condemnation of that, although some are beginning to call for him to resign. In fact, when he was questioned by journalists this morning saying, people have begun to call for your resignation from the Republican Party, what do you say, George Santos? And as the elevator doors closed, he said, if 142 people call for me to resign, I will. And people were like, wow, we can get 142 people to call for his resignation easy. But he then clarified that he had intended to say 142,000 people. If that number called for my resignation, I will resign. And he was making reference to the number of voters who voted for him. And he said the elevator cut me off because he wasn't even capable of admitting to having misspoken and not included all the words that he intended to, i.e. missing the word 1,000. He said, if 142 people call for me to resign, I will. I'm going to quickly also note that the Proud Boys seditious conspiracy trial is finally underway, and the government have set out their case in opening statements. Predictably, one of the defense lawyers moved to declare a mistrial. But yes, so they're pleading that the lawyers have been variously pleading that there was no plan for January the 6th, that it was just all chaos. And of course, that's the narrative that the Trump campaign was hoping would sell in the media, that it was just the emotional outpouring of a unfairly treated mass of Americans, as opposed to a repeatedly lied to and deluded group of Americans who listened and put their trust in the president when the president was a notorious liar himself. So the Proud Boy lawyers also claimed that there were some government informants on January the 6th. They may have been government informants, but they may have been government informants about all sorts of things. I think Tario was a government informant in relation to guns, and other people might have been government informants because the FBI was asking them for information about Antifa. I read an account of someone who was like reporting to the FBI on Antifa movements, and the FBI hadn't picked up on the fact that this Proud Boy was part of a seditious conspiracy working towards a riot, an attack on January the 6th to overthrow the United States government. And it shows the misplaced priority sometimes of those in institutions that suffer from a white pandering bias, in that it's harder for them to consider that white protesters, white people can be a threat, can be domestic terrorists. It's just a bigger stretch for their imagination because their baseline of assumed guilt is all unreasonably concentrated in people of other skin colors, because their internal framing of the world, their understanding of the world is driven by the idea of racial conflict in which some people are a threat, but white people are not that threat and don't easily leap into the mind as being targets for investigation. So they're complaining. Dominic Pizzola. A lawyer showed a slideshow of Dominic Pizzola's life. He's one of the people who first broke a window into the Capitol. His dog's amateur boxer. He had a boxing coach who was a woman and potentially gay. Wow. This entire case is about a 6-hour delay of Congress, asserts Roots. Yes, well, he's trying to minimize January the 6th and say it's just about a 6-hour delay, as if, oh, yes, my flight was delayed by 6 hours, but I got there. The delay was at the heart of the plan to say some of the Constitution's been violated. The stipulation of January the 6th as a confirmation date's been violated. Let's move on. Let's activate the 12th Amendment provision for a contingent election that Donald Trump would have won because there were slightly more Republican state delegates than there were Democrat state delegates. Once you use the 12th Amendment provision to say only one the representation from each state having one vote. The Democrats had a House majority in 2020, and on January the 6th, but the Republicans had 26. One more, actually 2 more delegates. The Democrats must have had 24. Why isn't this discussed? If anyone else ever comes across this being discussed in mainstream media, please let me know, because I think there needs to be more pushback against the idea that it was just hillbillies or just people protesting got a bit out of hand. It was a planned delay. Donald Trump understood how to work the crowd using his Twitter account, using his platform as president, using his bully pulpit as president at the time, departing president after he lost the 2020 presidential election. He knew how to pull all the levers at his disposal. And I was reminded today of a text of Donald Trump Jr. To Mark Meadows saying, we have all the levers in our control. In fact, let's see if I can find my own tweet. I tweeted about that today. Notifications. I'll have to scroll down a bit probably. A 6-year-old girl from Advika in Ukraine has lived under constant shelling 5 kilometers from the front line and died last night of a heart attack. It's hard. And yes, Biden has not stepped forward to say, yes, I took those documents on purpose. They belong to me. I'm not giving them back. And also, I just magically declassified them in my mind. Hence the quantifiable difference from Trump, whose illegal entitlement has been on full display. Did you take the car up, baby? Okay. COVID-19, know that it has likely immunocompromising effects that increases the likelihood of heart complications, even up to a year later, even in people who've had mild instances of it. Continuing risk of heart problems, this is important. And tomorrow we'll go through Representative Frederica Jackson's experience, that she shared her experience on the floor of being forced to carry her dead baby because it was prohibited by law for her to have a termination, even though her baby was dead. And the weight of that grief of carrying your dead baby, still going through the physical hardship of pregnancy against your will because you can't receive medical treatment, and it compromises your own likelihoods of survival. So she nearly died. there will have been women who died because of that inadequacy in the legislation, that devaluing of the lives of women. Ouch. We'll listen to that tomorrow because I have to go today. But I will also revisit this tweet from Donald Trump Jr. that I wasn't able to find right now. Thank you so much to those who tuned in. Thank you to those who have replay view, watched the show. If you have any ideas or wish to participate, let me know. I'm open to suggestion. And thank you so much to Bob as well. Bob thinks George Santos is in trouble. I agree. Yes, Bob Santos definitely linked a lot of expenses that happened to coincidentally be for $199.99, following 1 penny short of the $200 requirement for actual receipts. So you don't have to provide receipts if an expense is less than $200 on your financial disclosures, your campaign with regards to your campaign finances. So he got everything. He got hotel suite at fancy hotels for $199 when they've noted that one room for one night at their hotel is $700 minimum. Everything cost him. Uber rides cost him $199. So lists of expenses for that amount. Highly suspicious, and investigators will be able to determine that. Good luck to them, including the special prosecutor appointed by Merrick Garland to look into Joe Biden's the revelation that there have been documents at President Biden's home and in his old office. Hopefully it clears it up quickly so that they feel more comfortable charging Donald Trump for the far more serious breaches of the Presidential Records Act. So thank you. Cheerio, everyone. Bye-bye.